Well, Carl, here we are. It's May 23rd, and the big, beautiful bill, which did it get through? It's got to go through the Senate, right?
Well, yes, and what's there? So I
Wait, hold on.
it's got
Before we talk about
right.
what you want to get to, it still has to go through the Senate, so it's not officially done.
Well, not only that, it is not going to pass unamended in the Senate. So it has to come back through the House. And I just had a long conversation with a friend of mine that's because one of the things that was being talked about was the possibility of an NFA change related to suppressors, in particular mufflers, which is what they really are. They're not silencers, they're mufflers. Um, and I said, just sit down, wait. Yes, it passed the House. It is not going to pass the Senate without changes. And, that's the way bills work. They have to be passed in identical form by both houses of Congress. So whatever the Senate does to it, it will have to come back for another vote. And there's absolutely no guarantee that this thing is real yet. But we can now look at what the House actually passed. I've been ranting at this guy for a while because he keeps calling me, asking me about these things. He's a good friend of mine. And I'm like, look, I can go read this thing, but I don't know what the hell they're going to do in this committee or that committee in terms of marking it up. All right, so I am not going to sit here and read 1,500 pages and then have the committee tear 400 pages out of the middle of it and stick 400 different ones in there and have to do all the work again. That's not happening. So when I have something I can actually analyze, then I will. But I can at this point, opine on some of the things that are there, and more importantly for small business people, content creators, and things like this. People are independent contractors. What's not there? And there is a glaring missing component.
Sure, please.
So, one of the things that Biden did and Congress did during the crazy and in the few years after, which expires at the end of this year, is get rid of the Obamacare subsidy cliff. That was the screw you, literally bend you over the table reaming that happened when you made more than about $25,000 a year. Now this is for a single person. Of course, it's higher if you're a married couple. Uh, Essentially, what ended up happening was that much beyond that, you, for all intents and purposes, got no subsidy at all. So you could easily see $15,000 worth of additional expense in the form of the loss of that subsidy come out of the next $20,000 you made from 25 to say 45 or thereabouts. Essentially what this meant was that your effective tax rate on that second $25,000 was very close to 100%. So you made that $25,000, you didn't get to keep any of it. And that was, when that happened with Obamacare originally, that was the reason I shut down all of my entrepreneurial work. I just refused to set up a business, do any kind of entrepreneurial anything, because I am not going to labor for $20,000 or $30,000 worth of revenue and keep zero of it. I'm not going to have an effective tax rate of 100% on and it's we're not talking about the an effective tax rate of 100% on the 20 grand over $1 million or something like that. I mean that okay, I'd be a little annoyed with that, but it wouldn't stop me. But if you think that I'm going to start up something that because for the most part, when you start something, you don't make a lot of money in the first few years. It either works or it doesn't, but it's how business is. But this is off revenue. So for all intents and purposes, if you fell into that hole, you had this amount of money you had to make, and you didn't get to keep any of it, and you didn't actually start to do better personally until you had done that. And that is, unless it's addressed, going to come back because it expires at the end of 2025, and it's not in this bill.
So, okay, This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike. Let's back up a second. This bill was put in during this was included in Obama's presidency, correct?
The original cliff was in Obama's presidency with Obamacare. So basically the way the Obamacare subsidies worked is that if you had to make, in order to qualify at all, you had to make more than the Medicaid threshold, which is basically the federal poverty line, a little bit more than that, but about the federal poverty line. And then you got a subsidy up to about double that, roughly. Okay, I mean, it's not exactly that, but it's in that general area. And that subsidy phased out as you made more money. When you got to approximately double that, you had no subsidy whatsoever. So, and then what I predicted would happen did happen, and the cost of those policies, which of course are garbage, okay, they don't cover anything. I mean, okay, yeah, I mean, if you get cancer or something, after you fork up $15,000, they'll cover some of it. But for all intents and purposes, you end up with a situation where you have $1,000 a month premium, and if you're getting the subsidy, you're paying $50 or $100. But if you made that second $20,000, that entire subsidy would go away. And so, I mean, that's $15,000 a year. Well, you made 20. It's taxable as income. And on top of that, you lost the subsidy. So for all intents and purposes, you were paying all of it. And oh, by the way, you get to pay FICA tax on that too. You get to pay FICA Medicare tax on it because you're self-employed. Okay. So this essentially was a situation where, for all intents and purposes, you can keep any of it. And this was absolutely, I mean, that was the way the bill was designed. That was the way the original Obamacare thing was designed. Well, during the crazy, the so-called American Rescue Act, okay, modified this and stuck a cost test against your income, against your gross income. So if the amount of the subsidy recapture, if the total amount of your cost that you'd have to pay for the Obamacare policy exceeded, I think it's 6% or something like that, then that's the number. And the clawback was capped at that number. So essentially what that did was get rid of the cliff, where all of a sudden you go over this amount of earnings and all of your subsidy disappears and you have to pay it all back. And of course, for somebody that's self-employed, you don't know how much money you're going to make sometimes until fairly late in the year. Okay, I mean, you can have a situation, it's one of the things that I had a terrible problem with, because I'd start out the year and someone would call me up and say, hey, we want you to look at this, this coding problem, and we want to, get a contract with you to do this work. I'd tell them to go stick it. And it wasn't that I didn't want to do the work. It wasn't that I didn't want to, engage with them. It's that right there would blow me up. I essentially would end up taking the $15,000 I made from working for these guys and giving it to the government. I didn't keep any of it. And that's crazy. But that's exactly how Obamacare was originally designed. And that was one of the things that they did pass during the Biden years was, but it's a temporary suspension and it expires at the end of 25. So for this tax year, you're okay on it, but not next tax year. If nothing happens at the end of 2025, that goes away. The fix goes away. And you go back to what we had in 2011 and 2012.
So we're basically screwed again next year.
Basically, right. Basically, bend over the table if you're an independent entity or whatever. Now, the one thing you can do is don't buy the policy. Run naked. Get cancer, tough crap. You can do that because they got rid of the penalty. Originally, if you remember, Obamacare had a penalty. That got changed to 0, and that's permanent. So that still is a choice. But in terms of actually being able to get some kind of health care coverage, nope. That goes away in 25 unless you're willing to basically eat the second $20,000 you earn. It's more now because inflation has increased, has raised those brackets, but that actually makes it worse. You think about it.
So you can't even go out and get a private policy, say through United or Blue Cross Blue Shield, starting in 26, because you're going to get hammered with this.
Right. Well, there's no subsidy on it at all. And Blue Cross, you can get a private policy, but the Obamacare requirements on what it covers mean that basically you're paying for the guy that has AIDS. You're paying his bill, or the alcoholic or whatever. And if you're healthy, it doesn't make any difference. You're paying that other guy's bill.
Insurance is such a scam.
Well, insurance can never, we've talked a little bit about this, Mike, but insurance can never be allowed, and legally it's not allowed to. You can never get allowed into the pricing paradigm of anything, ever. Because if it does, this is what happens. Insurance company, and it always happens. And it's not, that somebody's evil. It's just the only way they can make money because insurance companies are regulated as to their operating margin. So if they become more efficient, if they figure out how to do more with less, they don't get to keep any of it. They have to refund it back to the policyholders in the form of lower rates. Well, that's not in their best interest. Okay. So that doesn't happen. But then, and Obamacare tried to block some of that with this medical loss ratio thing that's in the law. It doesn't work. Because what they did was they just aggregated it together. So you had, Aetna got folded up, CVS goes around buying it. Everybody buys everybody, okay? And that's how they get around that problem. Plus the PBMs get into the middle of it. That entire mess largely, it didn't start with Obamacare, but it got much worse. But the same thing's true with car insurance and everything else. You look at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, for example, which has driven mandates on automobiles, safety mandates. Okay, you can argue from the crash rates and the injury and fatality rates that airbags and seatbelts were good things. Okay, I mean you can look at the statistics and they bear this out that the rate of crashes, injury crashes, and fatal crashes per million miles driven went down after those things were put in and made mandatory in new cars. Okay, that's fine. However, that last major innovation was there, okay, in those things, and to some extent anti-lock brakes. Less of an impact, but it's there. You can see it in the numbers. But after that, now you got rear view cameras, blind spot monitors, this, that sort of interlocks, data recorders, all this other nonsense. You would think with all this very expensive stuff, which has wildly driven up the price of repairing a car if you get in a crash, therefore your auto insurance price goes up, you would think that there would be a commensurate reduction in the rate of automobile crashes, right? I mean, if this is really about safety, then the number of crashes would go down, the percentage of injury crashes would go down, the percentage of deaths would go down per million miles driven. All right, so norm it out for the number of times people get in a car and go somewhere. You'd be wrong. There's been no statistically significant change in that since airbags, anti-lock brakes, and seatbelts. Those are the three mandates that actually change something. All the rest have done is increase the cost. That's it. And the same thing's true in the medical field. You take a look at the medical statistic. Look, Social Security Administration, their actuary's job is to figure out the average, and of course some people do better, some worse, the average number of years of life you have left from birth, every single year from birth all the way until you lose the bet. Okay. They publish these tables. The latest one is a couple of years back because that's the way it works. So the 2024 report was 2021 was the actuarial analysis. And that partly is because it takes time for all the data to end up in the computers, and for them to be able to analyze it, it has to be in the tables. But if you look at this, COVID did take about a year to a year and a half off the life expectancy tables. Okay, now this is through 21. We don't have 22, 23, 24 yet. But it did. However, there's a problem. We were all told that that the horror of this disease was it killed granny all the time and didn't kill younger, healthier people. Well, the data says that the average years of life lost were actually worse in the younger brackets. Not by a lot, but that's the data. Okay? And furthermore, the change was pretty modest. It was about a year and a half. Now, if you back that out and then you look at the last 20 years, it's flat. How much has spending on healthcare and very expensive healthcare like cancer and things like this, how much has that gone up in the last 20 years? We've gotten absolutely nothing for it. Zero. You look at this statistically, it's a zero. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some people who would be dead and now they're not. Okay? But look, whether cancer kills me or something else kills me, if I'm dead, I'm still dead. It doesn't make any difference why. All right? So if the treatment kills me 6 months later, the only thing that changed is that the pharmaceutical company made $400,000. I'm still dead. And the data says that all this spending has not done a thing to help. Nothing. You would think everybody would live to be 100. It's not in the data. The supposed results, all these supposed breakthroughs, these supposed wonderful things, the data says it's BS. It's a lie. And it's simply because the insurance companies are allowed to get in the middle of it. You take a look at United Health's stock price. Now, I mean, they've gotten pounded in the last, couple of months. But you look at all these different companies and their stock charts are vertical since Obamacare came in. Why? How does a company in that kind of a market do that? Well, you either have to have more claims or you have to have more expensive claims. It's the only way to do it. Because you can't make a higher percentage. The law prohibits you from doing that, and the regulators won't let you do it. They won't let you keep it. So what you do as an insurance company is you intentionally make things more likely to happen, and when or if you can't get away with doing that, boy, oh boy, if people figure that one out, they'll get mad. So maybe that's not the way you go. But your other alternative is you make all the things that happen way more expensive. And that's how you make more money. The easiest way to think about it, Mike, is this. Would you, if you're an insurance company, would you rather make 10% of $1 million or 10% of $100 million? Because you can only make 10%.
Yeah, the auto insurance, I look at it like, I mean, I've been paying into this for how many years? Haven't had an accident, ticket, nothing. But if something were to happen, knock on wood, my premiums are going to go up. But yet, what have I been paying into for the last 20 years?
You've been paying for Jose, who doesn't have a driver's license or insurance at all because he's not legally present in the United States. And so if he hits somebody, the other guy has to pay that bill, and because he has insurance and his car's destroyed, and Jose doesn't have any money.
The system, everything is just such a grift. Like, it's just, and this is where I come back to, as we're going to talk more about insurance, man. You think the system could be salvaged at this point? Like, you get penalized for doing the right thing.
Well, you can fix it, but the way you fix it is you start putting people in prison because this conduct is illegal.
But let me cut you off, Carl. Nobody wants to fix it. That's the problem. Nobody's interested in it.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody wants to fix it because if you fix it, stocks go down, people lose their jobs. Okay. I mean, as we've talked about a couple of times, you look at the job statistics, they say they put 50,000 people into healthcare jobs, in the last month. Okay. Now, we're going to get another one of these reports in a couple of weeks. And then I look at how many people got added into the working age population in that same month. And it's, last month, I think it was like 160,000 or something like that. So you're telling me that we have to have somebody in the healthcare system for every 3 new people that come into the workforce? What are you smoking? By the way, the definition of entered the workforce is you cross the boundary from, birth to when you're counted in the workforce. Okay, so basically that is a a proxy for the population change. All right, so it's births minus deaths lagged 14, 15 years. All right, but that's what it is. All right, I mean, if there's more people dying than being born, now, of course, 14, 15 years ago, but if there's more people dying than being born, that number, that non-institutional working age population is going to go down. It's not, it's going up. Well, it's not going up fast, but it's going up. And it's actually risen at a fairly consistent percentage rate over the last 3, 4 decades. And yet, here we have every month, over the last year or so, 50,000 people in employment ads, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the healthcare field. And yet, we're supposed to believe that this is something other than raw theft, bend you over, assault you in the butt, when we have, one of those people that gets employed for every 3 people that came into the workforce. I don't believe that that has anything to do with actually treating human beings for whatever conditions they might have. 90% of that is simply stolen. And it's been that way for a long time. I've been raising hell about it for 20 years.
Well, and you're seeing it. We're witnessing it as we speak, and as many conversations we've had. Healthcare is collapsing.
Well, but you know what? I'm not convinced that if it collapses, that it actually is going to make anything worse.
I agree. Well, first of all, it's a luck of the draw when you go see a specialized, a specialist, say a neurosurgeon or a GI or what have you. It's literally the luck of the draw who you're going to get.
Well, it's also the other problem is nobody wants the statistics where you can actually see them, or the pricing where you can see them beforehand. I mean, it's if you remember the movie Armageddon, okay, the big asteroid is going to come and wipe out the Earth, right?
I love that movie, by the way.
Yeah, and one of the comments that's made is, this guy's saying, well, you have to do this, and you have to, launch all the nukes that we have at it, blow it up. And the guy's comment is, look, Mr. President, with all due respect, you do not want to take advice from a guy that got D- in astrophysics, and I was in the class with him. Okay, But what do you get the doctor that got a D- in med school? What do we call him? Doctor. Okay, so I mean, yeah, that's a problem.
We were, what movie we were talking about? I was on a show before starting this one, and a couple of days ago, I had somebody on and was talking about the movie Falling Down. You remember that movie with Michael Douglas and Robert Duvall?
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
But I've watched it recently, and man, is that movie? It came out in 1993, and how true it is now. 30 plus years later, and you're like, God, this movie, minus there were no iPhones and technology wasn't where it is today, but it is spot on to where we're at. And I mean, everything is just a grift. And you remember, I don't know how well you remember the movie, but you remember he just lost it, right? He was in traffic in LA.
He lost his marbles. Yeah.
And he hadn't worked for, he had been fired, but he was still going to work every day or attempting to go to work or whatever. And the first stop was he's in a deli beverage store with an Asian guy, and he needed a quarter to use the phone. But the can of soda was 85 cents, so he didn't have enough for a quarter. He didn't have enough to make a phone call. Right. And he starts beating up the, breaking shit in the store, and then it leads him to that perch where those 2 Hispanic guys try to rob him or try to take his briefcase. And I mean, just everything, all the events in him attempting to go to his ex-wife, and you're like, God, this is where we're at. Like, this is societal breakdown.
It's the challenge in front of the U.S. and not just in the United States. I mean, it's you look at what happened over in Spain. They we don't need any actual rotating inertial mass in our power grid. It's not necessary. We can turn all that nasty old stuff that generates that inertial mass by burning things, coal, natural gas, things like this. We don't need to do that. And then they get an instability in the grid that inertial mass The entire point of having it there is to resist that kind of thing. It's not there anymore. And the entire thing comes apart. Because if you get out of phase, the equipment has two choices: stay connected and be destroyed, literally destroyed, lots of smoke, lots of pieces, or open the contactors, take yourself off the line. Well, it's going to do the second. It has to. And now you have no electricity. And the really ugly part of those kinds of situations, what a lot of people don't understand, is an awful lot of that stuff can't black start. It has to have a stable frequency reference in order to be able to connect to and produce power on the grid. There are actually very few generating systems that can come up under their own power because they require enough energy just to run that the emergency generator that keeps the light on in the building is not enough. Okay, so for example, a nuclear plant generally cannot black start by itself. Cannot. There's no way to do it. It cannot. The diesel generators that are on site do not have enough electricity available from them to be able to run the cooling pumps at a sufficient level if they go critical on the pile. Now, they can generate enough power to keep it cool if it's shut down, which is why the generator's there. Otherwise, it melts down and you get Fukushima. But they do not have enough energy to be able to actually independently start. Now, I have some ideas on how to do it, but you'd be breaking every single operational rule in the book. And if you lose the bet, it goes kaboom. So it would be one of those things that, well, if there's a zombie apocalypse, then, everybody has run. I might take a crack at it, but I'm not at all convinced, it'd be better than nothing, but it might not work. And of course, fail is a very bad thing at that kind of a situation. But like a coal plant, same problem. The power requirement to run the auger to feed the coal dust into the burner, you can't do it off the little puny little diesel generator that runs a few lights at the plant. And so there are some plants that can come up on their own. The gas turbines that are used for peaking plants can, because they just need a little bit of energy to get the turbine spinning, and that's usually what's used to restart in that kind of situation. But that takes a lot of time. And so when you have something like this that happens, the situation that happened in Spain is you had outages that went on for a day or two, and that's why. Because you had to bring those few places that can start on their own power up, bring a couple of them online, and then slowly resynchronize everything to that reference. And you can't just push a button and have it all come back. It doesn't work like that.
I had a cousin that was over there. She was in Portugal when the power went out, and she did like a summary of it after. And
yeah,
I thought. This is like, I talk about the whole blissfully unaware, and she was, describing the experience like it was magical. And people, you felt the sense of community. Everybody had bread, everyone had olive, whatever. Like, they had food, and I'm just like, yeah, because the power came back on quickly. Another day or two, things could have went sideways real fast.
Well, what happens if you've got an oxygen concentrator in your house that you have to have because you've got emphysema, and without it, oops.
I wasn't even looking at it like that. I mean, you have, I'm assuming in Europe as well, Wi-Fi where you get your insulin, right? It's connected to the internet. But I was looking at it from the standpoint of, I mean, how many people have flooded all these countries from the third world?
Well,
and how crazy would it have gotten?
Oh yeah, you got about 3 days, okay, and then all sorts of secondary stuff goes wrong. The water tower, the pump that puts the water in the water tower is why you have pressure at your house. Well, that tower's empty. All right, now you have no water. There's another problem: the lift station that pumps the crap out of down the sewer pipes. It doesn't have any power either. Okay, now both of those probably have a generator, has a limited amount of fuel. That fuel runs out. Now what? Okay, the local hospital, same situation. You've got I'm sure they've got a generator, doesn't have an unlimited amount of diesel, when it runs out of energy, what happens? You had an outage, I think it was in Britain, where they didn't have the standby generator capacity because of green mandates at an airport. Now think about how crazy that is, okay? You got a plane that has so much fuel. Well, okay, that's fine. We'll just divert you to this other one. Oh, that's fine until it's not one airport that's off, it's all of them. You either land that airplane or it's landing somewhere. So that it is coming down is a certainty when it runs out of fuel. So you had better have somewhere for it to go. And this is, this kind of stuff, people don't think about this, but we have put so much insanity into where, this big, beautiful bill that just got passed. The bond market is having a conniption over it, as well it should. Because despite all the claims, we're going to get all this money from tariffs and we're going to, the budget deficit is going to be close. No, it's not. There's no spending reductions in that bill. None at all. Absolutely none.
Can I add something to that? And not to cut you off, but it sounds to me like the propaganda is just as bad on the right as it was on the left in the last 4 years. And listening to this big, beautiful bill, to what you just said, they're not cutting spending. It's like the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's got a different name on it this time. I mean, am I accurate by saying that, or am I way off?
Well, they just changed a few letters in the truth. Okay, it was the Inflation Production Act.
Wasn't it reduction? Wasn't it called the Reduction Act?
It was called the Reduction Act. It actually was the Inflation Production Act. Okay, and now you've got this, the best way to look at it is this is a big steaming pile of vomit bill. There's absolutely nothing beautiful about it. It's a huge pile of puke on the floor. And I don't know, and again, the Senate is not going to make this better. The Senate will make it worse from a fiscal balance perspective. That much I can guarantee you. That is not going to improve because you're going to have to buy off some of the senators in order to get their votes. Well, you do that with money. All right. So I don't see how you make this situation improve with the negotiations and the debate that goes on in the Senate. Then it has to come back to the House, get passed again before it goes to the president's desk. But just looking at what's there and what's not, I mean, one of the particularly galling things that they stuck in there is they lifted the SALT cap, which House Republicans in high-tax states said, if we don't get this, we're going to lose our seats in another year and a half. Okay, well, there's a problem with this. A tax decreases the deficit. Yes, the person who pays it does not like it, okay, because they have to pay it. However, every dollar of tax receipt improves the general fiscal health of the country and therefore the fiscal health of every citizen that lives here. Whether you like it or not, those are the facts. Now, that benefit is very diffuse because it's spread across the entire 330 million people. But it's real. And it's in exactly the same amount as the punishment that came from the person who had to write the check. Well, guess what? Tariffs are precisely the same thing. They're a tax. And yet everybody screams about tariffs because they're horrible. You're going to have to pay them. And yet, lifting the SALT deduction means that people who live in states that grift off more and more money and get absolutely nothing for it on a relative basis compared to places that don't do that, they get to bill everybody else by damaging the fiscal picture of the country. So they screw everybody. Now, the screwing is diffuse, but it's still a screwing, and it's in the exact same number of dollars that that person got to keep. So it's exactly balanced. And yet one is reviled and the other one is cheered. This is absolutely insane. You look at those people who are paying, $20,000, $30,000 in property taxes in some of these states. Excuse me, a decent middle-class house in Tennessee, in Knoxville, okay, in a city. We're not talking about in the middle of BF nowhere where there's farms and fields and cows. No. In the city of Knoxville, you can look this up right now, the stuff that's for sale on Realtor.com. Prices are outrageous. However, the property taxes are $2,000 a year. And for that, you get all the city services, the cops, the fire department, all stuff you get everywhere else. I pay my taxes here. They just repaved the road that comes right in front of my house. Literally today. The guy was out there with the paving machine and the roller. All right. They did the feeder street into here a couple of years ago, and it was the last time it was done was like 10 years ago. The road's not in bad shape, but I actually get something for my property tax money. We have city dumps. They're run by that. That's part of, it's part of what you pay for is the waste, dealing with the waste stream that civilization produces. Don't tell me it can't be done. It's just that everybody steals everything. I mean, you take a look at the Jane Byrne interchange in Chicago. That thing was under construction for something like 10 years. That's where 290 and 9094 all come together downtown. When I drove through there long after I lived there 25 years ago, and I drove through there like 10 years back, and it was under construction. Well, 5 years later, I went through there, still under construction. Well, you can't fix an interchange in 5 years? And there's like 3 dudes out there working. What? All right. How much money is just being stolen, and then the cost overruns and everything else, right? I mean, it's just, you want to know why the taxes are so high? Well, that might have something to do with it.
There's in Northeast Ohio, where I'm from right now, there's a big deal going on because the Cleveland Browns Stadium, it's the one they're currently in was built in 1999.
Yeah.
They want to move
that's not old. Yeah.
No, I don't think so either. They want to move it into the suburbs and build a dome, a $1 billion plus dome, with half of it being provided by taxpayers in the town. My mother, ironically, lives in the town where they're going to build it. And they claim it's going to bring all these jobs. And you know how these stadiums are. They put like an outdoor shopping, cheesecake factory, restaurants, blah, blah, blah.
Michael, they moved the AAA club from Kodak 20 miles into Knoxville. Okay, they just started playing there this year. I went to a bunch of the games last year. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the stadium that they were playing in. Nothing.
Was that the Titans you talk about?
No, it was the Smokies, the Sevierville Smokies. Now it's the Knoxville Smokies.
What is that, football? What is that, Carl? I don't know what that is.
AA baseball.
Oh.
Okay. Cubs Farm Club. It's a Cubs affiliate. And actually they've produced a couple of players that ended up getting called up and were real. Right? I mean, there's a couple of the guys that I used to go see now they play for the Cubs and they're the real majors. But I mean it's professional baseball, but it's the thing is though, general admission tickets and I mean we're talking box seats right behind home plate, $12. In Kodak, but double that down in Knoxville. By the way, so is the beer. And the parking's $20. And it used to be $5. All right. Is the other park nicer? The new one? Yeah. And there was nothing wrong with the old one. But what you did was double the price to go and hang out and have fun. How much of that do you think I'm going to do? Probably not nearly so much, right? But everybody made their money. And I went to one of the games. They're not filling that place up. The whole premise was that they'd get far more patronage there. Well, if they're going to, I certainly didn't see it. The attendance was no better there than it is in Kodak.
I was trying to look up what the projection is of what this is going to cost, and they want half of it to come from the taxpayer. I want to say it's like 1.5 billion or something. And
why shouldn't the taxpayers pay for any of it?
But who's going to make it to the top of it, right? Like who's going to ultimately get the money from all this? And it's not going to improve the residents of that township. They'll say, well, the residents are going to benefit from it. No, they're not. They're
Yeah.
not going to. They're not going to. It's just one big grift. It's going to bring more traffic, more crime. What I really think is funny, in Cleveland, they want to build a dome. Cleveland doesn't make the playoffs hardly at all. They're not playing in January. What the hell do you need a dome for in Northeast Ohio? They haven't had a dome. They've never had a dome.
It's, yeah, it just, it's just kind of silly, and yet when you look around the economy, I mean, a lot of people have gone after the whole sport ball thing, regardless of the sport, for a long time, with regards to the grift there and the stadiums and all this kind of stuff. Um, but part of the problem is in a lot of these things when you get the public subsidy coming out of the local taxing authorities, whatever. Bottom line is that everybody that lives there gets screwed whether they enjoy that kind of particular sport or not. And it's one thing to pay for it if you like it. Well, the way that we normally do that in a capitalist economy is that you buy a ticket, right? The guy builds the stadium and he puts on his exhibitions, and if he prices the tickets in a way that he makes some money on the investment in the team and the location, and if he prices them according to the demand and what people are willing to pay, then he makes a profit. If not, he goes broke. And that's capitalism. That's how it's supposed to work. But what these guys do is they come in there and they rig the game, and the same thing happens throughout industry. And you look at what happened to Foxconn. They were going to put up this great chip plant just north of the Chicago, the Illinois-Wisconsin border. And of course, the reason they were going to do it in Wisconsin was that the tax situation in Wisconsin is cheaper than it was in Illinois. Well, they got the subsidy, they put the thing up, and then the plant went poof. And so all these supposed jobs that were going to be generated didn't actually get generated. As far as I know, I don't know what the site ended up being turned into, but what it was originally supposed to be, it didn't. I have a suspicion that, when you look at these deals on balance, they don't pay off. They just never pay off. Right? I mean, we had one of these things with Ford got the Tennessee legislature to approve massive tax breaks to put an EV plant here in the state over towards Memphis. And Memphis, of course, is a less desirable metropolitan area to live in. I'll be polite. I mean, unless you like getting shot at, then I guess it's fine. But certainly not my first, second, or third choice as an area to live in Tennessee. And but now Ford is saying, hey, wait a minute, nobody really wants to buy $100,000 electric F-150s and Mach-E Mustangs. We don't seem to be selling as many of them as we thought we were going to sell. Now what? Right? You already got the subsidy. You already took the land and built the plant. Now what do we do? Because if you don't have demand for the product, those jobs that were supposed to be driving, they're supposed to be the entire economic argument for giving you this, was that these people would get jobs, they'd spend that money in the economy, this helps everybody else. They got to go to Home Depot to get a washer or a dryer or whatever. Well, if they don't have a job, they're not going to Home Depot. And they're certainly not going to the bar. And they're not going to the Texas Roadhouse or whatever else because they don't have a job. And what they are doing is ending up on welfare and probably drinking or using drugs, and now they're wildly driving up the state's medical costs because they don't have any money to pay for that either. And here we are again. So I mean, but a lot of this is structural. Whatever you incentivize, you get more of, and whatever you tax, you get less of. And so there's a lot of howling coming from the left about the Medicaid provisions in this bill, because one of the things that's there is the same thing that Bill Clinton put in there in 1996. Who remembers Bill Clinton? One of the things he did with welfare reform was that if you were able-bodied and you were receiving public assistance, you had to do some kind of work. or you had to be enrolled in and passing at school. You could do either, but you had to do one of the two, or your assistance got cut off. You could not sit there and play video games and watch sport ball all day and drink. That, if you could choose to do it, but you weren't going to do it on the taxpayers' money. And he was the one that signed that. So, and last time I checked, he was a Democrat. And I could be wrong about that, but last time I checked. So,
you want me to look it up on the internet, Carl? You want me to look it up to
yeah,
confirm
well,
it?
I could be getting, the early stages of dementia, like Joe Biden had for the entire 4 years he was president of the United States. But I do believe, yeah. And now all of a sudden it's evil, it's terrible, it's ripping candy away from children and taking babies out of mothers' arms and we're putting people in the meat grinder and excuse me, why, this is just about this guy's doing it, therefore it sucks. If my guy does it, it's okay. Right? That's all it is. And yet here we are, we do this ratchet job back and forth, and yet nobody ever actually goes after the level of spending contrasted with the level of taxation. There is no reason on this earth that you could not take the federal government back to 2019, just before COVID. Why can't the federal governments be okay being that size, spending that amount of money? That would be a 30% reduction, roughly, about a third.
So I looked up the stadium. So I was wrong. $2.4 billion, and they want $600 million from the taxpayers.
That's the number should be zero. Okay.
But here's the thing with that: the residents aren't going to be able to. They're not going to put it to vote because they know.
Right.
They're going to vote that down.
Well, one of the things that I think is fascinating, one of the reasons that Tennessee has managed to kind of keep their act together to a larger extent. I mean, still, you've got the stupid stuff like what happened with the Ford plant and things like that. But one of the reasons is that our school systems are not funded by the local county property taxes. They're funded at the state level. And the argument always has been, and it logically makes sense, but this is a place where it ends up being false. And the proof's here, okay, is that the closer a government decision is to the people who are affected by it, and therefore the more they can vote for or against it, the better. All right, so the argument for having schools funded essentially almost entirely by county property tax levies is that you can throw the bums out if you think they suck and they're wasting your money. And, oh, by the way, the guy in the next county over can't vote in your county election. Okay, so he can't throw out your guys and vice versa. This also means it can't, I mean, what are you going to do? Bribe all the county residents to vote for something stupid? That would be very difficult to do. So that's the logic. The problem is it doesn't work. And you take a look at places like Chicago, they spend an insane amount of money per kid in the schools. And I can tell you all the way back to the 1990s, because I ran a company there and I used to have to hire people out of the local population pool because that was the people that I had available to hire. 8 out of 10 could not do basic 4-function arithmetic on a piece of paper and pencil, and they had high school diplomas. They couldn't do it. They couldn't make change for a $20 bill. They couldn't calculate the sales tax given the percentage rate on an over-the-counter sale on a piece of paper. They literally could not do it. Talking about being able to do multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. They couldn't. That's insane. And yet, they were dumping something like $18,000 a kid per year into the schools. That's nuts. Okay? And then you come into somewhere like here, and they spend far less, And I'm willing to bet that I could grab any random high school senior, and every single one of them could do that.
I'm coming across more young people, especially young men, that I speak with, or friends of mine's kids. They start college and they drop out after a semester.
Well, college does not pencil anymore for basically anybody. If you look at the mathematics on it, and it's not just what you see at the time you go in. Okay, it's the kind of things that we've allowed to happen in the labor force that are illegal, but the government refuses to prosecute and refuses to stop. For example, Disney infamously, quite a number of years ago, forced all of their IT people to train H-1B replacements, and then they fired every one of them. Now that's against the law. That is a crime. It is a false statement. You have to make a statement under oath that the position you wish to fill cannot be filled. There are no qualified applicants available in your market. Okay? Well, the fact that you just had all these people that worked for you and you forced them to train their replacements and then you fired them, and the only reason they trained the replacements is they got no severance if they refused, that's proof that you falsely filed that application for those H-1s. Proof. By your own actions. Every single person involved in that crap should have gone to prison immediately, but it didn't happen, and never does. And so you go to college, you get a computer engineering degree, you work for 2 years, and then you have this happen to you. Then what the hell do you do? Okay, I mean, even if you actually are good at what it is that you go to school for, and oh, by the way, you're sitting on $100,000 worth of debt that you can't discharge, which is the other problem. When I was of college age, you could spin pizzas and pay cash. I'm not saying it was necessarily fun, but I quit after a couple of years, but I paid for all of it with money that I earned. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, and I had no debt.
A friend of mine's son dropped out. He said that the school that he went to was, they, them pronouns. And when Trump got reelected, one of the professors gave them a week off to heal.
See, why would you pay anybody money to? Okay.
Why would you subject your kids to that? And financial means, okay, you've got the money, you've got the liquidity to do that. That's on you. But why? And then these kids take out these loans, and they become slaves right out of the gate.
Well, my problem with all of this is that, of course, the howling is, well, we have to do something about that. We have to give them some way to get out of it. No, absolutely not. Every one of those kids was an adult. Every last one. All of them. They all signed the paperwork. They all knew they had to pay it back. All right, and now you're seeing, oh my God, go over on Reddit if you want to really you want to get a good chuckle, either that or a good cry, one of the two. Grab a bottle of vodka before you do it, cheap vodka, because you're going to want it. All of them on there howling about the fact that, what do you mean now I got to start paying? And they got Biden basically said, well, okay, you're in default, but we're not going to actually come after anybody. And now that's over, okay? And all these, do you think these people took the money that they should have been paying and put it in stuck it in a bank account? Okay, yeah, didn't earn a lot of interest until the last year or so. Okay, whatever, but at least, stash some of the cash. Oh, no, they all blew it on trips to Cancun and, nice new car and, oh, let's go drink out, out drinking with the buds and all this. And, oh crap, what do you mean we got to pay it back? And then they got the notices, they ignored them. All of a sudden their credit score goes down 400 points. They had 700s, now it's 350 and 4. And they're like, what the hell happened? Well, what the hell happened is you got reported as delinquent on, $25,000 that you're past due on. Oh, by the way, your balance is 90. Okay. And FICO is saying, that counts. You're about as creditworthy as a cockroach.
But also you're such a mountain. You're in a hole, and you got to get a job if you can find a job.
Look, for people that sat on this thing for 2, 3, 4 years, and basically their gambit was that they were never going to have to pay it. Okay, that was the gambit. I mean, if you had that kind of a gift over that kind of space, you would think these people, all right, they go out and they get some kind of a job. Well, guess what? I was planning on having to fork up, $400 or $500 a month, $6,000 a year. Okay, well, over 4 years, that's $20,000 plus. So where the hell's the 25 grand that should have been sitting in the bank? All right, then they come bang on you and you say, hey, now wait a minute. All right, I don't have all of it, but I got this. Okay, let's work something out here. And yeah, you might actually get somewhere with that argument. But basically the middle finger, no, they're not. That's not going to go over well.
Yeah.
I think the way you solve this going forward, Michael, which of course nobody in Congress wants to do on either side of the aisle, okay, is that for the people who did it before, there's nothing you can do. You're going to have to pay. Sorry, that's the way life is. You agreed to it, you signed it, that's the way it is. But going forward, college, there is no federal backstop, there is no federal garnishment. If the college takes you as a student, they are the co-signer on the loan. If you default, they eat it. Now, you're not going to be getting $100,000 degrees in African studies if the college has to eat it, if you can't get a job that pays the 100 grand back, and you ain't going to be getting a job that pays 100 grand back in African studies, except for maybe the 5 guys that they need for a professorship over the next 10 years. Those guys will have jobs. But the other 400, no. And so that stops it, because now, hey, the college knows that, well, all this offshoring that's going on, all this Chinese crap, all this, send the labor over to India, whatever have you. Well, the university knows that if they have a nice expensive program and they hand out loans to you, they co-signed them. Now they get real interested in stopping the offshoring of the labor and destruction of the wage base in America, because if they allow it to go on and they don't bring the political pressure to put a stop to it, they're the ones who are going to get it in the butt. That's the way, again, whatever you provide incentives for, you'll get more of. You want better behavior by corporate America? Stick it back up the university's backside when they are training people for things that there is no possible way for the cost of the degree that they confer that you can reasonably pay for it.
Do you I want to ask you one more question about academia, and then I want to talk about the state of things.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of college is going to be? I mean, I think, like we touched on with healthcare, is collapsing. So is academia.
Well, and it should to a large degree. I mean, but one thing I will say is that the idea that so-called AI is going to basically displace all of what currently is considered technical work is the biggest load of bilge water I've ever seen in my life. That is absolute garbage. I mean, I've played with all these things. Okay, I write code. I just got done doing the integration software to take contributions on my site and do my own video server and basically take all my content, all my multimedia content, and most of my other stuff and bring it onto my own infrastructure. Okay, I looked at using Substack. I've got some serious problems with what's going on over there. It's a nice idea, but they've got the same problem every other social media and similar site has, which is that they're full of spammers and AI bots. Okay, my timeline, I mean, I put one post up and my timeline was full of I guarantee those are robotic. I guarantee it, right? Probably 75% of the stuff that it surfaced to me was not human. And then on top of that, their subscription model is 1 month and 1 year. There's no 3-month option, and you can't blank the year one. And there's a serious problem with that, because if something goes wrong and you decide to cease publication, you realistically are going to get hit with chargebacks for everybody's time that still remains, and they already took their percentage. So if you refund those people, you can't take the percentage off. You're going to take a huge economic loss. Now, if you can limit your exposure, say to a 3-month period or a 1-month period, that'd be okay. Because then you just say, well, I'm shutting it down in 3 months, and I'll do it for another 3 months. That's all right, but you can't blank the yearly option on their site in the setup. Won't let you do it. That's intentional. And on top of that, you're still exposed to chargeback risk. They don't eat that, you do. Well, I mean, if you take credit cards yourself, you do it through Stripe or PayPal, somebody, you're exposed to that risk. Well, what am I getting for the additional, it's basically doubling of what the merchant system on online transactions normally charge. What am I getting for that? And I looked at all these things and I said, if the people that were there were relatively, it was a relatively clean environment and that it was real humans, okay, maybe, because there are some tools I actually like. Some of the summaries that they produce, like off the videos and stuff like that, and their processing time is extremely fast, which is nice. I mean, Rumble is hideously slow by comparison. Of course, Rumble doesn't do subscriptions per se. They have advertising. But I looked at it and I said, you know what? I can sit here and I can spend, a week banging code intermittently, so it's not really a full week of my time. Maybe by the time I get done and I have everything actually live and operating and stuff, it'll be a week. But then I own all of it. I choose my own distribution policies. I choose whether or not, how aggressive do I get if people share login IDs? So that, like, I'll give my password to 5 of my friends so they can all watch the content and only one of us pays for it. How aggressive do I want to be in policing that? My software doesn't have any problem with spammers and robots on it at all. It hasn't for better than 15 years. I solved the problem 15 years ago. Nobody else has. Well, if nobody else has, my only conclusion is that they don't want to, because I'm certainly not the smartest person on the planet, and yet I figured out how to put 100% stop to it. There's zero problems with it. And it's not because people don't try. It kills hundreds of attempts a day. So, but it gets them 100% of the time. And yet, I don't care where you go, on X, on Facebook, on Substack, Instagram, every place you go, it's full of this stuff. And the only conclusion I can draw is that they want this. And here was another interesting thing. I just saw this yesterday. I think it was yesterday. CrowdStrike has an awful lot of information on data flows, right? They don't know who people are necessarily, but that's what they do, is look for attack patterns and things like that. Right? So they compile a tremendous amount of information on data flows across the internet. And they pointed out that it wasn't that long ago that Google's Spider came into your site, indexed all your stuff. But in return for you letting them do that, what you got was people Googled things, and then they clicked the link and they came to your site. Okay, so you gave them the processing power and such that your system had to expend in order to let them have that index access. But what you got in exchange for it was traffic. All right, so there was a balance to this. Well, that's degraded by about a factor of 6. In other words, there's no value in anymore letting Google into your site unless you're running AdSense. And AdSense payouts have gone through the floor for independent content creators as well. I know because I've had an AdSense account for a very long time. And part of the reason is I can't talk about 75% of the stuff I want to talk about without being censored or banned. So most of my content has to go on the no advertising side, which doesn't run any ads. And Google has even gone so far as to flag stuff that I wrote 15 years ago they had no problem with, and I had advertising against for that entire 15 years. For example, all the stuff about low carb eating. They blackballed all of it. They call it all medical misinformation. But they had no trouble with it when I wrote it originally, and ran advertising against it. It was fun, no issues. What they're willing to let me talk about and actually monetize, it's not worth doing. And yet they want to spider the entire site the entire time. So there's two sets of problems. Then you add to this a third one that this guy wasn't talking about, but he should have been, which is that the AI robots that come in and spider your site are insanely more aggressive than the search and advertising-based guys. Ridiculously so. Now, I figured out how to detect them, and I've blackballed basically all of them so they don't do any damage to my infrastructure and my costs. But for most people, that's not going to be the case. And there's several of them that are stupidly aggressive. There's one called Bark Crawler that is especially bad that I think is out of China. But they're just stealing. They're just taking your content. You don't get anything back from them at all, of any kind. This model is going to collapse. I don't know exactly when, but it will. It's not sustainable. And what comes out of it in the future, I have no idea.
How do we've always talked on, or our last few conversations, you've given the assessment of the Trump administration, what they needed to do in the beginning. And now that we're, what are we at now? 120 days? 4 months?
Yeah, 4 months or so, roughly.
Where are you at with what they're doing, and your assessment from the economic standpoint?
Well, he's shooting a lot of mortars into the air. Fortunately, he's not pointing any of them at anybody that needs to be shot with them. So a lot of noise, a lot of bright flashes of light in the sky. But it's kind of like setting off nukes in space. It's a pretty light show. But it doesn't blow up the bad guy because he's on the ground. And I don't see, you saw this thing come out of the HHS, it was about a week ago, that, the drug, and it's an executive order with it. The drug companies must, employ most favored nation pricing or else. Or else what? What, they all took a hit the day that announcement came out, right? I mean, the entire sector got cremated in the market. Most of them have bounced back pretty hard. And actually, the funny thing was that there were some CNBC analysts that put up some articles after that, and some brokerage analysts that said, that's a nice threat. It's a bunch of bullshit. It's an empty gun. He's not going to shoot anybody. Why do you make threats like this? If you really mean it. And by the way, this is conduct that under 100-plus-year-old law is a felony. Not a civil offense. It's a crime under 15 United States Code Chapter 1. International discriminatory conduct and price fixing is under that law. You can go read it. Okay? It explicitly includes international commerce. Okay, indict Pfizer. Indict the CEO, the CFO, and the entire board of directors. Have them all face 10 years in the slammer. You want to see the problem get solved? Do that to a couple of those. Do it to Merck. Pick one or two and nail all of their executives and make them defend those charges. Now, might you lose? Maybe. But the law is pretty clear. And you can do the same thing to the insurance companies, and there you won't lose because you have a Supreme Court precedent that goes back to the late 70s and early 80s that says that conduct falls under 15 U.S.C. Chapter 1 as well. So, destroy United Health. Indict all of their officers, their CEO, and their entire board. You're all going to prison. $100 million in fines is not going to hurt the company. That's the fine. But 10 years in the slammer, that will change people's opinions. So you indict him and you seek prison time. But he hasn't done it. The same thing with the whole illegal immigration thing. Okay, do I like the fact that he's throwing a bunch of gangbangers out of the country? Yeah, all right, that's great. But we're talking about small ball numbers, and the way you solve this problem is, because the Democrats will run screaming to the courts. They get injunctions that, by the way, those injunctions are facially unlawful under the rules of federal civil procedure. But of course, he hasn't argued that either, which is the other problem. You're supposed to have to post a security bond in order to get an injunction in the amount of the damage that would be taken by the other party if you lose. Well, that's tens of billions of dollars, which none of these people that are suing have. Without that, the injunction's not valid. That's under the rules of the federal courts. Okay, it's not, that's not speculative. It's not an option. It's a requirement. And yet, so he could very easily say, look, you filed a motion with the court. You say you either impose the security requirement or we're ignoring the injunction because it's not a valid injunction under the rules of civil procedure, under Rule 65. He hasn't done it. Same thing with the illegals. 8 U.S.C. 1324 says you harbor, employ, whatever, that's a 10-year in prison felony. Okay, go into a Tyson chicken plant, arrest all the people that work in the front office, throw them all in jail, indict them. The hell with this fine crap, start locking people up. How many people are going to employ an illegal immigrant if they see a bunch of people frog marched for doing it? No one. No one. No one's going to jail for 10 years so they can have Jose put a roof on. It's not going to happen.
Are you disappointed so far? Are you surprised by any of this?
Not really.
Yeah.
But I said I'd give him a few months in order to see whether or not he meant it. I mean, like I said, it's like shooting off nuclear weapons into space away from everything else and blow them up. They make a nice, pretty light show. You could hope. Homan's making all the right noises. The problem is Pam Bondi, I had every reason to believe, was going to do exactly this. Make a lot of noise and screw with people, but not actually prosecute.
You called that, right? You called that in other previous conversations based on the Trayvon Martin, and then, I mean, the Epstein stuff was in Florida.
I called that one because I knew what had happened with the Martin situation, and that was based on what I lived, and I was heavily involved in the Libertarian Party at the time, and so I was all over that during the time it happened because it was a topical issue of great interest. And
Kash Patel.
Here's my question. Well, Bongino, where is, okay? So supposedly they have all these Epstein tapes that are essentially kiddie porn, all of them. Okay, I mean, this is what they've said. They've got hundreds of hours of this stuff. Where are the arrests? I get it, you can't publish child pornography. Duh. Okay? Do you need to publish child pornography to charge every single adult that you can identify in those videos? The hell you do. Where are the criminal charges? All the noise making is one thing, but these are serious felonies. We're talking about people abusing little kids. I don't know that it gets much worse than that.
Yeah, people, we like, it was always, first it was Elon was going to save the day. Then it was, I'm sure, Kennedy. Kennedy was going to save the day. Then it was Kash Patel, Bongino. I'm like, yeah, I've mentally moved on from, I have no I never did, but I have no expectations for any of this at this point.
I don't either. And then you have, and then you have Johnson, who we knew was nothing other than a cave monster when it came to anything fiscal, because that's all he's been done the entire time he's been in the House, okay, as a speaker. Um, it's very similar to what happened the last time around when Biden was president, and they had the reconciliation bill that was sitting in the House committee, and Massey voted in the affirmative after bitching about how terrible it was for the deficit, he voted in the affirmative to vote it out of committee, and he was the deciding vote. If he'd voted against it, it would have died there. Then he went all over X and everywhere else and howled about how horrible it was. He voted to put it on the floor. Without that vote, it wouldn't have gone on the floor, because you would have had to file a discharge petition, which they did not have the votes to sustain. It's all theater, every bit of it.
What about the economic front right now? Do you see what's happening in Japan with the bond markets there?
Oh yeah. Well, it's happening here. Okay.
Is Japan a great? Let me interrupt you a second, Carl. Is Japan a greater risk than the United States, or from the bond market standpoint, or is it?
So,
just give me your assessment.
So Japan is always been a part of the twist game that's played between hedge funds and other money managers in the arbitrage between countries in the bond market. Okay, they've always been a part of that. The yen carry trade was was infamously a big part of the stuff that blew up in '08 and unwound and things like this. And part of the reason for that is that Japan is one of the few countries that has a stable enough government and a stable enough market for them to be able to do that, to be involved in that. And it's perceived as being relatively safe to get involved in things like that. Problem with that is always that it is until it isn't. And when you play with the kind of leverage that you can use in the bond market, you get blown up fast and hard. And when it goes wrong, it really goes wrong. So there is a real risk there, but the bigger risk is here, because the pattern that I see in the longer end of the curve implies that someone, and you have to assume the Federal Reserve is involved to some degree, but not all of it. There's people out there that are screaming about the Fed has restarted QE and blah, blah, blah. The numbers are tiny, okay? I mean, their balance sheet does come out. It does show these transactions. They're not large. But people don't like to play with the guy that's walking around with a case of dynamite. You don't know if it's lit. And so when you see these kinds of things come out of places like the Fed, people do step back from it, because, they do have a big hammer if they choose to use it, right? The problem with using it is that you drive inflation expectations, and they're already very high and worsening within the population. The Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey on that comes out every month, and it's not going back down at all. In fact, it's still creeping up higher. At the rate we're going, I would not be surprised. I mean, a chief had said he's got people talking about 7%. I said on the 30-year bond. I said, you're going to be looking at 10 on the 10-year bond within the next couple of years if this crap keeps up. And there's silence, right? Because that upsets every apple cart. All right, I mean, you're talking about a crash in the equity markets, in housing, and industrial finance. It all goes up in smoke if that happens. And the problem with trying to control it is you can't. Because what would you rather have, a 10-year treasury at 10% or a 10% inflation rate? Because if you try to slam down the 10-year treasury, what you're going to get is a 10% inflation rate. So, and there isn't any way there's no margin to try to dampen that out. And as I pointed out when the Ukraine thing started, And this is where I think a lot of the people in the market have it wrong right now because they haven't realized what we did and the real impact of it. But I pegged this very early on. The funding currency for international trade for ever since Bretton Woods has been the US dollar. And it's not because the United States is a clean shirt. It's because we're all a bunch of hookers and we've got crabs and everybody else has AIDS. And so you choose the guy with the crabs or the girl, depending on which way you swing. Not because you wouldn't like to do better, but because there isn't better. All right, and so that's what you do. But when the Ukraine-Russia thing started, we sanctioned people and stole the money from people that had absolutely nothing to do with the conflict. They were private businesses that had zero political connection to the Kremlin. They had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with what kicked that off and what sustained it. And yet we robbed their money. We stole it. Now, if you're in international finance or trade, why would you expose yourself to that? You'd be out of your mind. And so once we demonstrated that we were willing to do it, that went away. So now everybody funds their international trade in their own currencies because you can't do anything about the fact that your government might be a thief, but you sure as hell can stop Uncle Sam from stealing your cash. And so that's what's happened. And that means that the buffer that we had for monetary and fiscal policy against it showing up in the inflation rate in the United States is gone. And it's never coming back. There's nothing we can do to fix it. There's nothing we can do to restore that confidence. It's been destroyed. And that's the paradigm shift that underlies all of what's going on right now within the bond market. And the fiscal situation with this big, beautiful bill that isn't actually going to cut any kind of spending at all. We're going to pay for this, and it's going to get bad. Because all of these people think that we're still back in 2004, 2005, or even for that matter, 2011, 2012, when we were coming out of the great financial crash and we were printing money like crazy, or during COVID when we were doing it, before the Ukraine thing kicked off, and it didn't have much impact. But if you look at when the impact really hit us on the inflationary side, it was after Ukraine and Russia started fighting. And we started dropping sanctions on people. That's when it happened. And that's why.
What is your definition of bad?
Don't need credit. And if you are in things that are dependent upon leverage and credit to have the values that they have, you're in for a rough time. Those values are going to come down to what they can be paid for without having to take that financing out.
You mean homes?
I mean homes, I mean stocks, I mean corporate America does not you want to see an eye-opening chart, go grab the Fed Z1. Look at non-financial corporate debt. Okay, it's a column in the table you can pull out of there. Just pull it up. I haven't looked at it in quite a long time, but I can tell you what it looks like. Corporations never pay it off. They always roll it over. That's fine as long as the cost of money is stable or getting cheaper. It's not fine when the cost of money goes up. It destroys margins.
So, for example, let's say a $300,000 house, suburbs in Tennessee or Northeast Ohio, that could drop and cut in half, if not more.
Well, this is really easy. I have this thing called an HP12. So you have a $300,000 principal. We'll do this right here on the podcast.
Make sure you describe it for the audio listeners.
All right, so it's a $300,000 house. You put that in, your PV, your principal value, right? And we're going to do a 30-year loan, so that's 360 payments, right? That's N. And let's say that we started with a 4% interest rate, right? So we'll do 4%. Yeah, wait. 4%, and that's per year. And we'll run that calculation And that ends up being about, no, that can't be right. Hold on a minute. I screwed it up. 1,000 and 360. There we go. Payment. Okay, that's still wrong. I have to look at the back on this. So I won't do it on the air. The bottom line is that if you take the payment that comes from that original calculation, okay, so you got your original interest rate, you got your payment, and then you put that in there with your your 360 payments for 30 years. Okay, here we are. The P&I, principal and interest on that loan, is $1,432.25. Okay? All right, now let's put that in as the payment. So we're going to start by putting that 1432, and we hit CHS, which has changed sign because it's negative. We put that in as the payment. Now we're going to say, okay, it's not 4%, it's 8, right? So now that's the interest rate. It's 360 payments still, because it's still a 30-year loan. Now you've put in those 3 buttons. Now you hit PV, it's the principal value. How much house does the $1,400 payment buy? And the answer is $195,157.96.
So it doesn't quite cut it in half, but third.
What if it goes to 10? If it goes to 10, it does. Yeah. So explain to me how rates go from 3 to 7 and the price of the house doubles. Because per this, it can't.
What's your conclusion?
It won't stay there.
It's coming crashing down.
Yeah. I mean, that which can't continue won't. Exactly when, I don't know, but that which can't continue won't. And I mean, the amortization table is what it is. Okay. If you've got $1,400 a month for a house payment, well, depending on the rate of interest, tells you how much house you can buy. That's all. It's really simple. And if people can't buy, then look, anything is only worth what someone will pay for it. What you paid for it doesn't make any difference.
And if and when that occurs, that's where it comes circle back to this conversation of falling down.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, at the end of the day, everyone needs a place to live, right?
Well, also, you've got home values, pension, how's it? You have pensions, retirements, jobs.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so much of what we have today is built on this ever insatiable leverage and the increase in it and the ramp. And that none of these companies ever pay any of this off. They just roll it over and refinance it. I mean, the federal government's debt's bad. You take a look in the private sector, it makes your eyes water.
And individuals, though, they live in a debt-laden society too.
Well, yeah, but then, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, you got these people on Reddit that are like, oh, well, what the hell happened? I had a 750 FICO score, now it's 400, right? Because my student loans, actually, the default was actually filed, which, by the way, I defaulted on 2 years ago. Okay. So what happens to if you need to borrow money with a 400 FICO, what do you think your interest rate's going to look like? If you can get a loan at all. Joe's Loan Sharks on the corner might have something for you, right? Now, here's the other bad news. That score goes into your car insurance and your homeowners. And not in a small way either.
Last question. Well, I don't even know why I'm asking this. I think I know the answer. Do you have optimism right now in the short term for any of this? Because I don't.
No, none at all. And I'm not completely done with regards to the possibility that Trump is going to realize that this is like really stupid and that, you know, you got to call a curtain down on the games and the bullshit. But I mean, the one thing that I do like is that the preliminary thing out of HHS, you know, the Make America Healthy thing, the preliminary report dropped, and it doesn't tell me anything I didn't already know. The real big one is due in August, which is, okay, what policy changes are coming out of this? All right, that's where, but again, these are longer term things. And this idea, you know, you've got all this strum and fear. I mean, could Trump turn around and make a real difference right now in the trajectory of healthcare spending, for example? Yes, he could. He could take that executive order that they issued on prescription drugs and turn it into enforcement in an afternoon and start hammering people over the head with a tree. Now, I don't think he's going to do it, because why don't you just do it instead of making a lot of noise? All right? I mean, if I'm going to come after you, I'm not going to threaten you first. You're going to get a summons. You know, or if I'm a prosecutor, you're going to get an indictment. So what's with all this BS? But you know, everybody makes this whole big thing out with him with this art of the deal stuff. Okay, let's see the results. I'm not interested in the language. I'm not interested in the words. I want to see actual answers. And telling me that you're going to solve the funding imbalance problems and then cheering on a House bill that increases the deficit. And oh, by the way, the last time that we were on, I told you that there was 1 month, that we had 1 month worth of fiscal data, the first real one when Trump was in office, and it actually was a fairly positive change. It was, if it had extrapolated out over 12 months, it was going to end up being about $1 trillion in difference. That's not small. Well, unfortunately, we now have the next month's. And all they did was not pay people for a couple of weeks and shifted it, because the spending went right back where it was. So yeah, we got some money in tariffs, but there goes that idea that we were actually going to see sustained progress. Nope.
You think the general public's ever going to realize some of this stuff that you've just talked about for the last hour and a half, or they'll just keep the breads and circuses going on? Like the MAGA loyalists, they won't even listen. They don't hear.
No.
They're just as bad.
I have, you know, I have a guy that's he's on my forum, and he's very, you know, very pro for this and DeSantis and all this. He lives in Florida, okay, and he likes the guy and all this. And he put a comment up this morning, and I said, you know, you really need a new pair of knee pads. That was my comment back to him. I, you know, one of the things that I heard a long time ago, and it's true, is that a recession is when your next door neighbor loses his job, and a depression is when you lose yours. And what tends to snap people to attention is when it actually comes home and hits them in the face. Okay, and that's what you're seeing with the people that are, you know, are now getting hammered from their own stupidity on the student loan situation. But it's picking up. I mean, you look at the number of people that have been fired in high-tech fields and can't find another job. It's pretty substantial. I mean, there's a couple of years ago, when you totaled it up over the space of a year, it was something like 400,000 layoffs. And that's not a small number. And you know, are they reflected in the you know, annual, you know, the monthly job reports and the annual weekend? No, they're not, because people go out and get another job. But the thing is, when you get the slowdowns and that turnover becomes, oops, there ain't nobody else, then the rubber hits the road. And I see internal signs in the economy and the data right now that it's starting. Now, how bad's it going to get? How deep will it get? I don't know. But I am seeing signs that it's starting. And it's not tariff driven. I can tell you that right now. People are going to try to use that as an excuse, but that's not the reason. What's
the reason then?
It's just People are just overextended. Too much leverage in the system. The cost of borrowing is going up. The cost of borrowing is not going to stop going up until the government stops running huge deficits. That's what's driving the increase in financing costs. And so the squeeze continues. And so as a result, you see everybody try to squeeze everybody else and screw everyone else because they're trying to keep their head above the water. You know, so if you're drowning in the pool, but you can stand on somebody else's back, it works until he dies, and then you sink along with him, and then somebody stands on your shoulders. So I mean, it's a bad game, but it's the game that everyone's playing right now.
Where can people find you, Karl?
Market-ticker.org.
As always, thanks for doing this. I know it won't be that long before we chat again, and we'll see where things are at in our next conversation.
Yeah, you know, life goes on. So this too shall pass. We just might have a little bit of a rough ride.
Mic drop.